Welcome to Mistakes Were Made, a podcast about non-monogamy for messy people like us. I'm Sarah, a queer therapist, writer, parent, and journalist.
And I'm her husband, Alex. I work in communication and education. I'm the father of Sarah's children.
I forgot to add accomplished liar to my bio.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And I'm Jessica, the resident monogamist for the podcast here producing, and I've never told a lie in my life, especially not to either of you.
That's why we have you on the show today.
Yeah.
We had to search far and wide, and then it was such a surprise that the one person we could find who had never told a single lie was already our producer.
Yep.
Very convenient.
Honest to a fault, and everyone hates her because of it.
That better be
Just
a lie.
kidding. Just kidding. It's a lie. It's a joke. Similar to a lie. Yeah, so if you didn't get the idea already, today we're talking about lying, honesty, power, and how all of that shows up in relationships, both in monogamy and non-monogamy. Sarah, tell us why did we start talking about this?
All right, well, it's Bell Hooks' fault. A friend of mine actually asked if I had ever read Bell Hooks' book, All About Love, and I realized I had not. I had read maybe some excerpts from it in college, and I was like, whoa.
Which is shocking because you've read every single important work of feminist theory.
Exactly.
That's what you're making it sound like.
That's exactly what I meant to imply.
People might be surprised to hear that Sarah had not read that book.
Well, I also appreciated that this friend then was maybe faux shocked. They were like, what? You haven't read All About Love? Let's make a book club. So we did. And I guess I was surprised that I hadn't read it because it is an important work about relationships, and especially relationships between men and women and the kind of archetypal roles men and women play in really traditional and patriarchal settings. And I don't know if y'all notice this about me, but those are themes that I'm interested in. So, Hooks is a theorist and writer on race, feminism, and class. This book came out in 2000, and it critiques romantic love and how we conceptualize of it in modern society.
That all sounds very high-minded.
I am really smart and super
Sarah's
important,
smart.
and I am pushing my glasses up my nose right now.
But don't worry, because this is not going to be a boring episode of the podcast. I promise.
Everybody already turned it off.
Wait, don't touch that dial. We're going to talk about lies that we've told each other and kind of examples of other lies that get told in relationships, and maybe how we can learn to accept and transcend our instincts to be dishonest.
How to Love the Liar Within.
Ooh.
I'm just workshopping titles.
Yeah. No, but seriously, I think everybody does, and like we don't want to present like lies like lying is like with a capital L. Bad people lie, good people don't, right? Everybody does, and there's like certainly a spectrum of like. And actually, this comes up in this book a little bit. I listened to another podcast about it where they were sort of quibbling with the idea. She was like, if I get a gift and I don't like that gift, I'm going to be honest. And then they went on this whole tangent about like, really? So clearly that just like kind of illustrates like our discomfort with the truth maybe, and how it's like very sort of like socially acceptable to sugarcoat things in certain settings or whatever.
Any social contract is going to require fibbing, basically, right?
Yeah, but then when it comes to intimacy, and I think the chapter, so we're kind of talking about the third chapter of this book that's titled Honesty and something, and it's really about like intimacy and honesty, be true to love, and how difficult intimacy is if there's not honesty, and like how the two things kind of go together, but that sort of like dishonesty and lies kind of like permeate society, especially in romantic relationships, especially across gender. Sarah, will you read the opening quote of this chapter?
Ooh, yes, I will. Look, it's got red pencil marks all over it. That's how, pink.
It's actually bubblegum.
Bubblegum pink. That's how you know it's important. And feminist. When we reveal ourselves to our partner and find that this brings healing rather than harm, we make an important discovery, that intimate relationship can provide a sanctuary from the world of facades, a sacred space where we can be ourselves, as we are. This kind of unmasking, speaking our truth, sharing our inner struggles, and revealing our raw edges is sacred activity, which allows two souls to meet and touch more deeply. John Wellwood. Lifted directly from his Tinder profile. This guy has game, y'all.
I mean, his name is Wellwood. He's getting a lot of So that's all really nice. Honesty and openness advance intimacy, right? That's kind of what that quote's saying. But I don't think that's usually what happens in most relationships necessarily, right?
I mean, my first answer is no. And I don't know how much that's informed by being a relationship and couples therapist. People don't usually come and see me because they're like, our communication has just been radically honest and open. I mean, I would say that like the number one challenge that people have in intimate relationships is exactly that. So, yeah, it's hard. And it's not necessarily what we're encouraged or trained to do.
Right. And so it's kind of your job to like help facilitate people having that honest and open communication, and maybe having another external person to be accountable to helps with that, right?
Sitting there eating popcorn, being like, then what happened?
Okay, I brought a clip too. I'm very well prepared today. So we were watching last night the show Beef, which is a great show. I think has tons of deception, self-obscuring, not to spoil anything for anybody. I think it's pretty clear from the get-go that it's
just a bunch of really healthy people in healthy relationships just doing some good modeling for us, basically. Yes. And it has Ali Wong is starring in it, and she's hilarious and incredible.
It's a great show. And yeah, let's hear the clip, and then we can kind of talk about this. Is like the her and her husband are sort of like maybe the culmination of a conflict that they're having.
You had so many opportunities to tell me.
I know. I've been like this my entire life. I want to blame my parents, but I think it's just me.
I feel like I married a stranger.
George, I'm a bad person. I've tried to hide that from you because you're as good as it gets. That's why I fell in love with you.
Okay, I'm going to stop it before the spoiler. But you get the idea. She thinks she's bad and has to lie about who she is because he's better than her, right? That's kind of like what she's saying.
Yeah, and there's this kind of dynamic that I think is probably recognizable to many of us, that we fall for someone that we perceive to have these like more high value characteristics. They're more moral than us. They're better than us. They're good. And through them loving us, we will have our own parts of our personality that we really dislike or think of as bad somehow transmuted or forgiven, or I don't know.
Yeah. Which is interesting because like it's like everybody thinks that. The people on both sides of the relationship think that. Like imagine that you think that about your partner. Is your partner just like, yeah, totally, and I like you because I'm too good and you're bad, and so we're good balance that way, like.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think of this term I think we've used on this show before, the idea of like shadow alchemy between people, that it's like there's all of the things that we show the world and that we would show our partners that might draw us to each other. But then there's all the shadow side that we don't show, that's more obscured or that we feel ashamed about or that we haven't really like looked at, explored, or integrated. And that also draws us to people. For better, for worse, I would like to say usually for better if you're both willing to get curious about that shadow side. But
yeah, and like I guess the arc of a lot of relationships, like the way that we get into a deep relationship with somebody is like by sort of slowly revealing more and more of ourselves, right? Rather than, it's not like you put it all out there at the beginning necessarily, or probably you definitely don't.
Yeah, I was thinking about, didn't you and I have, like, we were making some sort of cynical joke about the trajectory of sort of toxic monogamous dating and pairing off, where you're like, I'm just trying to find the person that I have enough chemistry with, that the new relationship energy lasts long enough that we get really committed to each other before the shadow comes out. And then we can't run.
Yeah.
Which is super cynical, but also, I mean, I see myself in that. So
Yeah, and I guess that, like, that definitely feels like a pattern that people go through, but also, like, you really have to believe in yourself as kind of, like, unlovable to, like, want to do that, right? To want to do that for too long.
Jessica's doing a lot of fancy nodding over here, and I want to know about these nods.
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, I think we were having that conversation the other day, Sarah, and I've been thinking about it a lot. But I think the thing that also comes back to for me, and maybe this is just the journey I am on right now, but that, you know, we think about, I mean, that it's like about your relationship with yourself, right? And about not lying to yourself. Like, that's the first person that we lie to is ourselves. And it's not even possible. Yeah, I mean, which I guess is like what she's saying, what all of us are saying here, that we think. I don't know. Yeah.
It's partly about where we learn the concept of highly conditional love. And I think, like, that show Beef goes into this really deeply. Yeah. Certainly, any couples or relationship therapist is going to be, like, I almost said by the third episode, which really reinforces this idea of me just sitting there eating popcorn. By the third session, you're going to be like, tell me about your parents. Tell me about your relationship with your parents. Because at some point, we learn to lie from our parents. We learn to do, like, little white lies or little, like, fibs, you know, the kind of lies that just, like, grease social wheels. Say you love an auntie that you haven't seen for 3 years, you know, say you love the present that you got that you didn't. You learn, like, little lies to keep out of getting in trouble about, like, eating more candy than you were supposed to. And you learn that because you also watch your parents do that.
Right.
And then you also learn these, like, hiding lies, which are, like, maybe you start getting the message that there are parts of you that are too difficult for your family. And you start worrying that if you showed those parts of yourself, that you would lose love.
I'm just smiling because I'm thinking about how our daughter admitted the other day that she had peed in the plant.
That's right.
But then she kind of unadmitted it. Yeah, in the houseplant, like the big houseplant on the big ficus. She peed in the ficus when I was in the bathroom. But then she was like, no, I didn't do that. And I honestly still do not know what is true. And I kind of love that because it's like, I don't know if she was proud of making up some outlandish shit that she did or actually did it and was, like, obscuring that but then admitted it. But clearly she's not, like, deep in shame about it. She's like, tee.
Well, and this is where lies and power start to intersect. And Bell Hooks talks about this a lot in chapter 3, is that's what kids are often playing with. And you can see our daughter playing with that, where she's like, what happens if I admit this? What happens if I lie about it? What happens if I lie and then admit the truth? Like, she's just trying a bunch of combinations to see, like, what kind of power might I be able to exert in this situation? What sort of reactions might I provoke? What does it mean to play with the truth like this? So I say that because it's also, like, perfectly natural to play with those things, and there's nothing inherently wrong with it. We're raising our kids really well. They're super well adjusted, everybody. I swear.
I think, of course.
I need a sound effect for this episode. That's just like,
It's also perfectly natural to pee in a plant. I thought it was a great choice. If you
Problem
have to pee,
solving.
you only have one
Resourceful.
bathroom like us. Yeah, pee in that plant. That's great.
yeah.
So I was thinking about in the show, it's kind of interesting. This scene we just heard was like her sort of coming clean about, like, with herself and with her husband. And, like, the two main characters in the show are both, like, kind of in conflict because they're, like, sort of angry and uptight and like can't express themselves, and then they each have a foil who's sort of like good, right? Like her husband is just presented as like she's saying in that scene, he's just like really good, and the guy's brother both kind of like naively good, and like they're alienated from those people because they feel like I'm the bad one and they're the good one. And yeah, I don't want to like go too deep on like where the show goes, but it's just like interesting that they have this thing in common, kind of.
Right. And the good ones are sort of presented as being a little bit dumb.
Right.
Which I also feel like is kind of relevant here when we're talking about like power and truth and some of the hierarchies in relationships.
And maybe they're sort of foils, like they're not like real people. They're sort of a storytelling device to make you understand the main characters a little bit more. Anyway,
watch the show.
Watch the show. This is all very abstract and high-minded.
That's because I'm avoiding the next part of
the next
this
section is
podcast.
Lies that we have told to each other. I feel like in sort of the pre-non-monogamy iteration of our relationship, there were some sort of like big ones.
Yep.
And when we were kind of discussing this episode, like you sort of told me one that it wasn't like new information to me, but I hadn't really like remembered it. It didn't like stick in my brain, and then you sort of resurfaced it. So yeah, and I thought it was really interesting how it kind of fit in with the kind of thing that Bell Hooks was talking about. Just sort of like there's sort of like these cliched, gendered lies.
Do you want to introduce Bell Hooks' theory about that, or talk about the lies? Damn it! I just keep trying to stall.
We'll do the theory afterwards. But I can go first. Do you want me to go first?
Deal.
Okay. So I guess it's now clear that we're talking about ourselves. We'll talk about some other people later. But so I'll just talk about myself in the first person. I was gonna like do it in the third person in some dumb way, but I'm not going to. Yeah, so, there was a time, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but there was a time in our relationship where I was sort of slowly developing feelings for a coworker, and rather than, like, saying anything about that to you, I just, like, totally kept it internal, did not talk about it. I think I definitely, like, sort of indulged thinking about it to myself. It's not like I was, like, lying to myself about it. Maybe I was lying to myself about like whether it mattered or was important or not, but it was certainly like internally acknowledged but not externally. And then I like made efforts to spend time with that person that would sometimes like just sort of like logistically impact our lives. I'd be like, I'm going to the office today, and like have reasons that were, the emotional reason was probably wanting to like have lunch with that person, and instead I made it sound like I had to do something else. So like a sort of bigger emotional withholding that spread into like more like sort of logistical, smaller falsehoods. And then when it sort of started to come out, because like I was just very like upset about a work transition that was impacting that relationship and kind of making it end, then I didn't like tell you what. I was like too deep in that, too far down the rabbit hole to like, I mean, I could have, but I decided not to like tell you about it. And even when you asked me about it, I was like sort of gaslit you, like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. It's just this thing, or it's just that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember all that.
Yeah.
Yep. That seems
Just
like a pretty close accounting of what happened.
Just wanted to bring it up again.
Yeah.
You know, because we're all better people now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it just like seems like that is pretty, obviously specific, but like pretty classic. I want to say like pretty classic man lying to his wife stuff. So that was when we started talking about this, I was like, oh, duh. Like, that's a very ready, important example in my life. Like, probably one of the biggest, like, dramatic points of conflict and hard feelings in my life. And then I was like, what about you? And like I said, I was sort of surprised at what you came up with.
Yeah, well, as we've been discussing this episode, I have more examples. But the one that really surfaced quickly reading this chapter of Bell Hooks was when we were deciding to have our first kid. And I had like a lot of ambivalence, I would say, about having a kid. I had long thought that I didn't want to, and then I had long known that I did, but didn't want to admit that to myself or anyone else because the implications of that for my career, my identity, my relationships felt like really frightening, and also just internalized misogyny and unresolved, probably to current day, unresolved feelings about motherhood and my own mother. So all of that just like was crowding around and making it really hard for me to be in touch with what I actually wanted, and let alone communicate that to you. So I wasn't really talking to you about that ambivalence very much as I was experiencing it. And then kind of my memory of how this went was a little bit out of nowhere. I was like, so I've been thinking that I want to have a kid. And you were like, yeah, I've been thinking that too. That sounds cool. And really attuned and thoughtful and like a very kind partner. And I got really excited really fast.
It helped that we were on a beautiful beach in Mexico.
It did. It did help. And
You're good with framing.
A note to everyone. The setting matters.
It wasn't like Tuesday morning, 7:55 a.m. It's raining.
You're like, do you want a future where 7:55 a.m. feels like sleeping in?
Yeah, right.
Why don't we have a kid?
Yeah.
But I remember us talking about it, and you're like, I don't know that I'm ready for this to happen right away, but I am up for us, like, kind of taking our time and moving towards it. And I was like, totally. Yeah, that's me too. That sounds exactly like the way I feel as well, which was a lie because I suddenly just felt panicked. Like I was like, I'm 35 years old. I might not be able to have a kid. I've like stated this desire that was really hard for me to get to. And now I'm afraid that it won't happen. Or it's too late, or, it'll be really difficult, or, there was a lot of fear that I had around that. But you and I agreed between the two of us that we were just going to like take it slow, stop using birth control, and kind of see what happened. And I immediately ran out and got like ovulation sticks and like downloaded an app and 100% was like tracking and planning like, and now I will seduce Alex when he comes home because it's in the window. And I wasn't telling you that. And I think you were like sensing it because at one point you were like, this doesn't feel natural or authentic. And I was like, what are you talking about? Here are some rose petals.
I thought it was my natural animal magnetism that was drawing you to me.
And you actually found a wrapper from one of the ovulation sticks in the garbage.
I have no idea how I even knew what that was.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, in both of these cases, we knew something was not right.
Right.
And I think like that's kind of an important thing, and we can put a pin in it and come back to it, is like when people are in intimate relationship with each other, you're attuned enough to each other to know when something is wrong and when a person is lying.
Yeah.
And then there's the choice to engage with them directly about that or not,
Yeah.
which then becomes like this shadow lie.
Right.
And so that was the thing that came to mind. It was an example that Bell Hooks also offered, though in her case, she was like, I would never do something like that because imagine tricking someone into bringing life into this world. What a shitty thing to do. And I was like, it is pretty shitty. I was pregnant within 2 months. So
Yeah.
whether or not you were ready for it to happen fast.
It happened. Okay.
Boy, did it ever.
I want to ask a follow-up question. How does it feel to say that out loud? Like to just like recount that.
I mean, it's a good question. Saying it out loud, I can access like a little bit more compassion for myself, where I'm like, I can see that younger version of myself like being really afraid. And one thing that both of you know about me is if I'm scared, I'm gonna I'm going to just like power through something really, really fast before I can have a second thought about it. And I'm like, that's what I was doing, you know?
Yeah.
But I also feel ashamed. Like, it's not something that I'm proud of. And, you know, I think even activates in me like some feelings of shame about like what a hard adjustment to parenting you and I both had, and whether or not that contributed to it.
Right.
You know?
Okay. I was asking because I feel like an absolute piece of shit. I have no compassion for myself. So, anyone's curious.
Yeah, I can access that
because
too.
yours doesn't sound as bad to me. Because I'm trying to figure out, is that because it's not as bad or because it's not mine?
I think one of the things we're going to explore in this episode, and I'd be interested for Jessica to weigh in with some of her own experience with lying. It's not like obviously there are some lies that are bigger. They're not all equal. But the betrayal is really where the harm is, if that makes sense. Like the scope of the betrayal.
Yeah, what makes the betrayal big or small?
I think it really depends. And I think that can be very unique to people and their dynamics.
Yeah. Well, and that gets me to the thing that's in my head. Like, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up, right? Like, this is the thing in politics.
He's always muttering this under his breath when we're listening to a podcast.
It's always true. Like, everything that somebody gets in trouble for, like, the big trouble doesn't come from doing the thing. It comes from pretending that you don't do the thing. You didn't do the thing. And, like, you know, and I think emotionally speaking, that's where there's more betrayal. Because if I had been like, I have feelings for my coworker, like early on, and like let you into that, like that would have been hard for sure, and like you would have been probably like hurt and like pissed and stuff, but it wouldn't be as damaging as you being like, you know, it getting to the point where you're like, I feel like something's wrong, and me being like, don't know what you're talking about, you know.
Yeah.
It's like,
if it's okay for me to jump in and say that is the part of the story that still hurts my tummy a little bit. Is I just remember like this really specific weekend that we spent together, and like we were celebrating, and I had gone out of my way to like get concert tickets and like go to a hotel and all of this stuff, and in part because I could tell that there was something wrong between us, and also something going on with you, and I was like, I'll just put a bunch of shit on a credit card.
Right.
This is another thing that I lie about, just for the record, and try and make it better. And it was clear that it wasn't. And I remember just like stealing myself and being like, what's really going on?
right.
Because I knew what it was big. And I was like, whatever it is, like we won't go to the show, whatever it is, I'll be here. We'll figure it out. And then I remember you telling me nothing.
Yeah.
And that is the part of it that still can make me have a feeling. Like the rest of it is pretty neutralized for me.
It almost ruined the Wu-Tang Clan for me.
It almost. I was like, I care about this so much that I won't go see Wu-Tang, and we will just deal with whatever midlife crisis you're clearly having, which I was hoping could be solved by Wu-Tang, but apparently not.
Well, subsequently it was solved by Wu-Tang, but not that weekend. Yeah, so let's, this is too hard. Let's talk about some theory.
Wait, wasn't Jessica going to say that she had lied sometimes?
I mean, of course. But I mean, I'm not coming up with anything half as interesting as what you guys have come up with.
Well, isn't that convenient?
That's rich. Yeah, she's just a kindly podcast producer.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, let's talk about the sort of gender binary that Bell Hooks sets up in terms of these lies, to see if like maybe that'll bring something up for you.
Okay,
Jessica.
I do. Yeah, I have.
And I feel like
thoughts on gender stuff and lies, anyways. But
yes,
I'll look for the right place.
I did find it like speaking of these bad feelings, I did find reading this book and thinking about the things that I had done in that context. It made me feel better because I was like, oh, I didn't make this shit up.
Absolutely
right? Like,
not.
It's not just like me, a sociopath, inventing lying in this way. It's like it's reflections of societal stuff.
Yeah, and similarly, I did feel better about that, even though Bell Hooks was like, I would never lie to a man about pregnancy, she was like, I do know a lot of women, shitty people, who have done that. And I was like, well, at least there's more than one.
I didn't read this whole book. I only read this one chapter. She didn't actually cop to doing anything other than not saying that she liked gifts. You know.
Okay.
So maybe we're better than her.
I bought that book for Curtis at some point in our relationship, and I also have not ever read it.
It's one of those aspirational gift books.
I think here you read this.
Yeah, I feel like you might read this.
Well, I did want to say about the gender binary that she is talking a lot about these archetypal she's talking a lot about these archetypal dynamics between men and women, and talking about it in terms of like patriarchy and power and sort of intergenerational trauma related to this. And that's kind of my caveat, because so much of it is set up to be like women do this, men do this. And I think it is valuable and useful because we live in a culture where those archetypes are interacting and at play and intersecting with patriarchy and power all the time. And like,
Yeah, and it's maybe not like a perfect way to get out of the problems of that binary, but like you can also think about it as like, this is a masculine and feminine version that like maybe that does not map to your assigned or identified gender. But
or
like,
even this is how patriarchy teaches us to hide from each other based on, kind of where we identify or how we were raised. Yeah.
Cool. Caveats?
In place.
Caveats engaged. Okay, so do you want to do women first or men first? Back to that binary.
Let's do men
Answer
first.
carefully. No.
Let's do men first because patriarchy.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm going to read this stuff that she says about men, and it's kind of in series, a bunch of different things from different places. The men I have loved have always lied to avoid confrontation or take responsibility for inappropriate behavior. Males learn to lie as a way of obtaining power. And then there's this part that says, from the moment little boys are taught they should not cry or express hurt, feelings of loneliness, or pain, they must be tough. They're learning how to mask true feelings. In worst case scenarios, they're learning how to not feel anything ever. These lessons are usually taught to males by other males and sexist mothers. Even boys raised in the most progressive, loving households where parents encourage them to express emotions learn a different understanding about masculinity and feelings on the playground, in the classroom, playing sports, or watching television. They may end up choosing patriarchal masculinity to be accepted by other boys and affirmed by male authority figures. So maybe that last bit wasn't as important or sort of like distracting from just the idea that like lying to obscure feelings.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that is what feels like the summary. And that there's this really tiny range of emotions that are acceptable for boys and men. And boys learn that really early. And like, it kind of breaks my heart to say this, but I can see this in our son already, that he's allowed to be angry. He's allowed to be funny. And sometimes silly.
Right.
But that a lot of those other, more sensitive feelings or feelings that are more aligned with femininity, he is hiding more and more.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that is the sort of compassionate childhood-focused, like, construction or idea of thinking about it, that, like, if we're not allowed to have feelings, we're not socialized to not have feelings, then it's hard to tell the truth.
Especially because it's easy to be out of touch with your feelings and how those feelings are impacting your behavior and your choices.
Right.
That's why I feel like often men or people who have this kind of hiding going on will be like, I don't know how I ended up here. I don't know. It just happened.
Yeah.
I just ran away to Mexico with this lady. I don't know. I just, whatever. There's this kind of like real systematic disconnect from, feelings, choices, and actions and consequences.
Yeah, I think it's kind of worth saying also before having that like really big experience that I was just talking about. I didn't have the vocabulary to be like I'm having a feeling or I feel activated, and like any compassion about that towards myself. Like I was always like, if I had that feeling, I was always like, oh shit, something's wrong. I've done something wrong. I need to just make this feeling end. And like in the sort of abstract sense, I would be like, of course I thought that I could have feelings, but like thinking back, I mean, then and probably even now, like that, like having emotion is scary and like not something that's really like I feel like attuned to or like kind of used to.
It's interesting because I think that maybe the direct response, and this might lead us into what Bell Hooks says about women, I think having desire is scary. Wanting something, stating that,
Right.
and really clearly advocating for it, which is what I was struggling to be able to do when it came to like wanting to get pregnant and have a kid. That seems like, for me, where a lot of my lying tendencies come from, is that I would have to be like, I want a thing. I need to now communicate that I want that thing, and I have to advocate for it, even if somebody doesn't agree with me.
Yeah.
And that makes me want to like hide and sort of maneuver.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to know if this rings true for you on that note. Women are often comfortable lying to men in order to manipulate them to give us things we feel we want or deserve. We may lie to bolster a male's self-esteem. These lies may take the form of pretending to feel emotions we don't feel, to pretending levels of emotional vulnerability, and neediness that are false. So I guess that's maybe actually kind of the opposite. Like you're talking about obscuring your own wants, and this is almost saying pretending to have wants that you don't have.
Well, I think there's both. One of the things that I hear there is it's interesting that she frames it as getting things we feel we deserve. I mean, that's the thing that really stood out to me. Feel that we deserve but can't access directly in some way is maybe what I would add to it, to describe that experience for myself. That there are things that I feel like I deserve,
Right.
but can't access directly. And I think that this also shows up a lot for me with money, which we might get to. But just that feeling of like, I deserve these things, but I can't say it directly and advocate for it. I have to like hide that fact.
Yeah, and I mean, I think with the fertility thing, since that's where we've been, like, the manipulation seems so justified. Like, that's like where my mind goes to, because it's like, okay, well, here's a woman in a relationship with a man who probably has a fairly limited understanding of like the finer details of fertility and like what, it's like we all know about the period, and then there's like a lot more.
Wait, what?
Specificity. There's more happening than they told you in science class. I mean, and I also like learned a lot more when I like went through fertility treatments than I had ever known before. But I think like there's this burden of knowledge and experience on women in that, this realm is such a good example of that, right? Where you have to know all of this stuff that like men don't have to know. And so since it technically could be possible to accidentally get pregnant sooner than you wanted, it just, I don't know, it just feels so like murky, and there's so much plausible deniability, and like just all of that is right there.
I would one up that. I mean, I think now I'm being able to access like some anger. Because I think that's there too. And I do think I learned this from my family. That with like the fertility and reproduction piece, it's like, no, I don't want you to have a lot of input on this if you want to know the truth. Like, I think there is a part of me that was like, I'm sorry, I like live in a world where abortion is just constantly being rolled back, and women have to think about and do these things in secret, or certainly a generation ago they were. And many of the women I'm related to were seriously hurt, and some of them killed through that. Like, now I'm just supposed to like kind of trust you with all the inner workings of this, and like everybody's just like on the same page about it, and like you should just be like super cool and vulnerable in that way. I'm not saying that's like my whole feeling about it, but I think it would be remiss for me to not mention that. And so I think that informs sometimes my feelings of like, I deserve something and I can't directly state it somehow. And so I'm going to like subversively try and access it.
Right.
This is, I'm not super like proud of this part of myself. So I'm not like, yay, girl power.
Girl power to
Total girl boss over here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that starts to get into some of the more sort of like elemental or maybe cynical or elemental.
Elemental, I love it. It's like
It's elemental.
the bedrock of cynicism.
Mark it. I'm trademarking that word, elemental. The things that Bell Hooks is talking about in here, she's writing 25 years ago, and I think in a little bit more of a, I don't know, like the paradigm seems like a little bit more kind of like extreme than probably like our relationship at that time or whatever. But like, you know, certainly things like the idea of like, I would never deceptively get pregnant. I think what she's talking about is like trying to like lock down a relationship through procreation. Like you're not connected, cohabitating, and like then you're like, oh, but if I, you know, sort of deceptively get pregnant, then I'm going to have this connection to this person. And like, yeah, that seems like a pretty, not just unethical, but also a pretty bad idea.
It's interesting in both of our examples, you can see that there's like these lingering shadows of more violent examples of both of these things, right? You didn't have a physical affair that you hid from me for like years. You weren't like a serial cheater, if you will. I didn't like poke holes in the condom. But you can see how like these dynamics are like these shadowy dynamics are there. And once we were talking about them, I'm like, this is all over my family too. Like I just see this everywhere. Of course, that's what it's easy to absorb and hard to extract.
Yeah, and I think the shadow version of the sort of compassionate readings of, you know, masculine and feminine lying, dishonesty with self and others are like domination and sort of like pleasing as access to power. You know, like she says men lie to amass power or protect power, and like women lie basically for the same reason, but from a position of not having that power because of patriarchy and whatnot.
Patriarchy and whatnot. That's another great book title that I'd like to just throw out. If any publishers are listening.
An elemental view of patriarchy and whatnot. My dissertation.
So, yeah, okay. You know, taking a step back here, why does it feel relevant to talk about this now, 25 years later? Why does it feel relevant to talk about it in the context of non-monogamy? Why are we talking about this?
Yeah.
Why did this like chapter of a book that was written 25 years ago, using like some language and ideas that feel kind of dated to us, still hit?
Because non-monogamous people are completely honest with each other all the time.
Exactly.
And have transcended all of these elemental deceptions.
We solved the patriarchy and whatnot with non-monogamy. And end of podcast.
Yeah.
Sorry, you guys have to be.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
We'll take a break.
Okay, I think there was some truth to the joke before the break that like there's probably more open communication, if only because if you're a couple in a monogamous relationship and you decide to transition to having a non-monogamous relationship, you have to have some conversations that include admission of some interest in doing that, right? So like mapping back to me when I was telling you those lies, I was not ready to say to myself or to you that I had an interest in doing that. And like even that in and of itself, even though it does not make for absolutely open, perfect honesty and communication, it is a step, right?
I think so. I mean, it comes back to that quote that I am not sure is mine. I think it's probably someone else's who's smarter than me. And so I'll look that up. But the idea that non-monogamy isn't for everyone, maybe isn't even for most people, and everyone benefits from having a conversation about it, I think for this exact reason. That being able to be in touch with your own desires, needs, and wants in a relationship, in intimate, romantic, sexual relationships, and communicate that to a partner, risking saying things that that partner may not like or might not agree with, and then hearing that in turn, and then being able to sit with that, and like just that, like building those muscles. Non-monogamy does require an interest in building and exercising those muscles, and I do think that that helps with all of this, because we're, what all of this has in common is that we are out of touch with ourselves, and then that creates these scenarios where we're lying to the people that we're supposed to feel the safest with and the closest to. So,
Yeah. But then on the other hand, it can also very easily be a way for, men to just do more of that domination and power amassing sort of cliche that Bell Hooks was talking about. And I guess for women to sort of like further acquiesce to what they think that their partner or even their other partners want, right?
So what you're saying is there's nothing about like the act of non-monogamy that is like inherently going to just like bust up these dynamics. You have to also have an interest in busting up some of these dynamics of like how the patriarchy is operating, especially between men and women.
Yeah, and I guess that makes me want to like throw out a couple of examples of things that we've heard recently, like sort of scenarios related to non-monogamous couples where some of this stuff continued to come up. So in one of them, it was like a couple that had chosen to like sort of decided together to open their relationship, and it seemed like, in the telling of it, seemed like a very like kind of mutual agreement. Everybody was into that, and in theory, they moved to having much more honest communication. But then it was later discovered that the husband had been had a relationship prior to that, like had been cheating prior to that, and nothing about all of the communication about opening their relationship and doing that for a number of years, I think, made him feel like he could tell her about the cheating before that, even though practically speaking the actions were the same.
It's that line from the clip, you had so many chances to tell me. Mm-hmm. You had so many chances to tell me. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to that couple after it was revealed?
They are no longer a couple.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that these dynamics are hard even when we have like these newer tools to try and talk about them and surface some of that shadow and explore it together. This is deep stuff, and it gets passed down to us kind of whole cloth sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like tempting for me to try to not necessarily like empathize with that guy in that story, but like think about like what was going on for him. Like I think that it's just very often just like the rationalizations could be things like, well, if I tell my partner this, it will hurt them. And what's the point of hurting them, right? Especially if that's like a thing that was over, it's in the past. It would be better for me to not to spare them the pain of that. I could see that as being one rationalization. I don't know if there are others. So what do we think about that one?
I've been thinking about that idea so much recently. It just somehow has come up in tons of conversations. And like, I think about a really difficult time that I had with my mom a couple of years ago where like, I I really needed her to help me take care of my dad in a way that she was not planning to do. And I was so upset about it. But also I was like, ugh, but I don't want to like have this conversation with her because that sounds worse than just dealing with the annoying stuff that I'm dealing with. And I know it's not going to even work. But I decided to do it. I like told her that it was really hurting me, that she was going to like leave the country when we needed her a lot. And she was really mad. It was rough. She was super upset. I was super upset. She still went on the trip. I was mad. It was tons of work for me and my brother. And it's like the best thing that has probably ever happened in my relationship with my mom in my adult life. And like, it's not a lot of people that I'm interested in, like having those are, it's so hard, but it's good, and so I think in all of our relationships, like if we want it to be better or more intimate, I guess, it's like you have to just decide, okay, now is the time I'm going to have this annoying conversation. And I've been thinking, I told y'all this is the journey I'm on right now, like thinking about having those conversations with ourselves too. Admitting maybe what we're lying to our partners about or to ourselves about as a first step in that.
Yeah. And it's pretty difficult to imagine that you can do that and not risk being abandoned, which I think is at root probably what most of us are afraid of. I know that Bell Hooks' theory about the domination and power, it's real, it's important, the patriarchy and the way it operates. But I think one thing that like men, women, everybody have in common here is that we don't actually want to be abandoned. We don't want to be left. We don't want to show these parts of ourselves that we think are unacceptable and have someone important to us say, yeah, gross, I'm out.
Right.
Because that sort of wounding feels intolerable, like the scariest thing that we can possibly imagine. So it's a huge risk.
Yeah, and it's like, in some ways, it can feel like you're protecting yourself by not having those conversations, not, telling those truths, but it's also like sharing yourself with that person, making yourself more vulnerable and like allowing yourself to be more intimate and connected with them, like giving them the chance to accept you, which is kind of like what the lady was doing in that clip. However that worked out.
And it does,
Mysterious.
It does make me think about non-monogamy, how we can repeat some of these patterns, how even when we're having relationships that look different. And this maybe calls back to an episode that we did about desire, power and desire. But as you were describing, the ways that we can like still hide and lie even when we really explicitly don't have to. I was remembering like the first couple of months of sleeping with other people when we opened up our relationship. And how I was not enjoying it. I did not like it. It was not fun for me. And I was going out with people and just being like, lying to myself, lying to them because I was trying to prove something, right? And any number of things. And finally, probably 3 or 4 months into that, I just had an encounter where I was like, okay, this is like the third time that having sex with a man has felt like this, and I have not said anything. I am clearly not in a position where I want to be like having this kind of sex with men, and I don't know how to even say that to myself or to them. I need to back off here and like go figure out what is going on with me. So that I can like actually engage in this in a way that like feels honest and not like I'm just doing this pleasing, hiding, acquiescing, proving weird shit that I clearly do when I'm in uncomfortable spaces.
Yeah. Well, and not to make it all about me, but it's interesting to think about like how that was also relative to me and our sort of decision together as a couple to like open our relationship, like was withholding the truth about your experience of that
Yeah.
for my benefit, right? Like you probably didn't want to be like, maybe for both of our benefits. I don't know. Maybe I don't need to speculate about like the reasoning, but like you didn't want to be like, this isn't fun. It fucking sucks. I don't like it. Right. Even if that's might have been how it felt, you didn't really like want to. I remember you talking about it being hard, but I don't remember you ever kind of writ large being like, this is really difficult.
Yeah, Jessica probably remembers that.
I do.
Because I did feel safer telling her that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I had my pride too, which doesn't help in these scenarios much. But yeah, non-monogamy doesn't save us from ourselves. That's for damn sure.
How does that relate to pride?
Oh, I think in that case, like, I didn't want to admit how hard it was for me, because doing that would also admit, like, some unresolved, like, wounding around sexual assault that I had, some residual hurt from your relationship with your coworker that I didn't want to look at. I just wanted to be like, yeah, this is great. Everything's fine. Let's just go out and have sex with other people. This should solve all of that, I think. And then, I was like, oh, this is just the same thing over and over and over again. And I do think that is a way that, at least for me, non-monogamy has helped with some of these patterns, because, boy, are they hard to ignore when they keep showing up over and over and over again with multiple people.
Right.
And
you're not just like, this is my relationship with this one person. It's like,
right.
This is my relationship with every person, aka myself.
AKA myself, and or sort of some of these gender dynamics that we're talking about. And you have to start doing a lot more elaborate lying to yourself and others to not look at it for what it is. And I think I just ran out of rope on that. It's like, that's it. That's all I've got in the lying department. Now it's time for me to actually face some hard stuff. Fun. Woo! So is it Friday afternoon or what, everybody?
Yeah. I have a note here about this thing that I've heard you say in the past that is like, I find I'm coming back to all the time and is really helpful. Sort of as reference that like instinctually men view women as the holders of their goodness, or like allow women to be the holders of their goodness, and women view men, or perhaps men can actually be the holders of women's access to power.
Yeah. I think about that a lot too.
And I think that characterizes a lot of the like dishonesty or lies in relationships between men and women. It's like, if I let you know about the bad things that I do or think or feel, then like I'll lose that connection to your goodness, or like a goodness together. Like, you are the innocent one.
Right. And that like comes back to the dynamics that we were talking about in the show, that one person is sort of like seen as innocent or too easily hurt, or like all these ways that it's actually an expression of disrespect. Like that idea that men are like, women are the holder of moral goodness and like sexual morality and all of these things, because they are more innocent, less complicated, not actually like in positions to hold complex, nuanced ideas all at once. I mean, it is inherently like a condescending attitude.
They couldn't hang with the hard truths of the real world of masculine power.
Right. And I couldn't. I mean, just for the record, I can't. I can't hang with that. Please, nobody expect me to hang with that.
Me neither.
And then this idea that men hold women's access to power, and that like through these intimate relationships is how we get access to that masculine power. That's what like patriarchy tells us about each other. And that's supposed to be, I think, presented as the motivation for us like having chemistry with each other and wanting to be together. Like that's supposed to be some sort of reciprocity between us. But in fact, like you can see that it's just like huge distance between men and women and our ability to be like complex. intimate with each other, honest with ourselves, to be, and I mean, this is maybe where we get into queerness here at the end, to also be more complicated than these binary gendered archetypes.
Right.
And for us to be able to access parts of ourselves that are masculine and feminine and non-gendered and, share that with each other.
It also like assumes that men can and do hold that power, which I think, is absolutely true. Like sort of relatively speaking, like, the patriarchy is real, just by default, men have more power. But then you see like men who are having the experience of feeling disempowered, completely like alienated from sexuality and relationships with women because they're like, but I don't have any power. They have all the power, but I'm supposed to have the power. And like just this like massive confusion around like, how am I supposed to show up according to these scripts if they're not like speaking to me? I mean, it just sucks.
It's toxic as fuck.
Yeah.
It's hella toxic.
Yeah.
And even like the mildest version of it is hella toxic. And then the most toxic version of it is fucking nuclear.
Yeah. When I was doing research for this episode, or when we were talking about it, I like ended up down some incel rabbit hole that I could not later replicate.
We will not be playing
thankfully.
Those clips.
No. I was trying to find him, but I couldn't find him again, which is great. But one of them was like this woman who was supposed to be like keeping it real, talking about what women are actually like, and she was like, oh girls, you know what you do, you know how you're like manipulating men to, and basically she was just saying, we're just all out here like lying to get access to male power. And like that was supposed to be a bad thing, which I guess in that framework it kind of is, but also
I'm just like, in that framework, I'm just like sort of morally neutral about that. I'm just like,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds horrible
Right.
for you, is maybe what I would say.
Yeah. And so,
Right.
But I can see why you're doing it.
I'm like really compelled to say that like that is all horrible, and it's also the water that we've like definitely for people our age we're like sexualized in and like learned in, and so it's gonna come up in our relationships and in sex and in like and playing with it is gonna be there and is okay and might make you feel better about it too.
Absolutely.
And like there's like a lot of like kind of power dynamic stuff that happens, and I don't want to sound like we're like, and that fucking you shouldn't do that or something like that. Like
no. And like, if we can, that's what I'm talking about. Just like pulling the shadow up and like getting curious about it. It's not eradicating it. It's not judging it. It's not like we can't. Like we are all of those things. I'm just saying like, let's talk about how this gets in between us and keeps us from being close to each other. And play with it, dismantle it, like make it more dynamic and flexible, laugh at it where we can, so that we can like integrate some of that shadow and get to be a little more complex and a little closer to each other, which is actually what I think we all want. Okay?
Okay. Well,
I just have one quick question.
I was just going to end the podcast right there. But okay, go ahead, Jessica.
Well, I was just wondering, we can take this out later, but I was just wondering if you guys have lied to each other recently, like Sarah earlier when we were talking about how long it was going to take you to pack.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Right.
I definitely lied that it was going to take me 20 minutes to pack. And I think that was a complicated lie because I think you also knew that was a lie as I was saying it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I did, probably, but still maybe not good. I don't know. Yeah, what else? What else you got?
Let's see. I was realizing that I thought the conversation that we had about like the kind of toxic monogamous scripts was with you, but actually it was with Jessica.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I forgot about that is because we were drunk.
I thought it was what? I thought it was at the nail salon. No, I think we were drunk.
No, I think we were drunk.
You guys are really
I know. Look at us.
embodying a lot of stereotypes. Like, were we at the nail salon? Were we at the mall? Were we drunk?
Was it white wine on ice? Yes, it was. But
Own it, girls.
I mentioned that because I remember I came in and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have drunk and smoked so much. Oh, I'm so bad. And then you were like, well, how much did you drink and smoke? And I was like, I had like 2 drinks and like a cigarette. It was really bad. And then I was like, why am I lying?
Yeah.
Like, I definitely had more drinks and more cigarettes than that, and both of us know it. So
Yeah, which is interesting, like inconsequential to me in some ways, but like you were doing that because you wanted to. Like, did you think I was going to judge you about it? No, you were judging yourself about it, right?
I am judging myself about it, and then I just want you to absolve me of it. But then I was like, it'll be too bad if I tell him it's 3 drinks and 2 cigarettes. He won't be able to absolve me.
Wow.
I don't know.
I
It's
we all
hereby
know it
absolve
was
you with
really-
my
Thank you.
inherent power as a man.
Thanks.
You are without sin, my child.
I don't think that's actually how you do the sign of the cross.
No, not
but
at all.
Nice
Good.
try.
Nobody can see.
Nice try.
Well, I feel like mine are like way worse. Like
Sweet.
it's usually to inside my head to protect your feelings. So like the other day when I was like going out with somebody for the first time and you were like, what are you guys going to do? And like we had planned to go to a bar. And then like before we had that conversation, she had been like, why don't you just come over? And I was like, okay. And then when you asked me what we were going to do again or whatever, then I was just like, yeah, we're going to that bar. And like,
Interesting.
sucks. Why did I do that? I don't know. I just like didn't want you to have the feeling of like being like, oh, they're gonna hook up, even though like we had a conversation about that, how that was fine. I guess maybe I felt ashamed in the same way.
Right.
I was like ashamed to be having a more like hookup-y date as
Yeah.
opposed to like, you know. And in your mind, you were probably like, they're gonna go to a bar and then go back to her house and hook up. So it's like not that.
Well, I
big of a
believe what I
difference.
said was, I'm like, is this like more of a hookup thing, or are you going directly to her house? I'm like, roll tape on that one, people.
And I think that, okay, all right, I don't know, yeah, maybe. Anyway, I didn't want to tell you the truth about that. And then I was like, but it's like stuff like that is so, I don't know if you feel like it's consequential or inconsequential or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think the compulsion to do it, which, you know, you and I both are still struggling with, is not something that we should judge. I think that's like what
Yeah.
I'm trying to,
Right.
where I'm trying to hopefully land with this is like, it's not our fault that these are the dynamics that we were raised in, that we were taught, that we were shown, that were just like presented as the only option. That is gonna come up in us. And we can't just like surgically remove it or decide like we're too cool for it. It's just
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And I think like the best we can do is what we just did, which is be like, okay,
Record ourselves coming clean.
here's how it still shows up, right? And be like, that's okay. We can deal with that. We can
Yeah.
have like capacity for that in ourselves and each other.
Yeah, and I guess understand why you're doing it. And like what you're getting out of it, or rather what you're losing in doing it.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do this to spare Sarah's feelings, but in fact, I'm sparing myself having to potentially sit with your feelings.
Or I think more maybe to the point, we lose out on the possibility for like healing and intimacy. You know, in both of those cases where I lied about the smoking and drinking and you lied about the going directly to someone's house, I suspect for both of us it would have been pretty accessible to be like, that's fine.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
It's okay. I love you.
Right.
Have fun. Sometimes you gotta do stuff that's a little bad,
Yeah.
right? And then we would have felt closer to each other and a little more healed in ourselves. And that would have been nice.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yep. Oh well. Too late. Fuck that up.
I'm guessing there's gonna be another
Okay,
opportunity.
we'll get another chance. Yeah. Thank you for that question, Jessica. How are we going to get away without answering that one? But I should have put it on the script if I didn't want to talk about it.
Don't ask questions you don't want answers to.
Good point.
I love that. That was so sweet. And I really hope that for you guys. That, you know, the next time this comes up, you get to, you know, say the truth and have that emoji with the tears dropping out of its eyes.
Yeah.
That's how I felt.
Well, let's try right now.
Thanks,
Sarah,
Jess.
you better go pack. How long do you think it's going to take you?
This is going to take me a half an hour. It's going to take me a fat half an hour.
Okay. Well, then we better go. Thank you so much for listening to Mistakes Were Made. We'll be back soon with another episode. We've been getting a lot of really nice positive feedback recently. So if you have some, lay it on us. Tell us the truth about how great this podcast is, or don't hold back. We want your input. And if these conversations are like feeling helpful or at very least entertaining to you, please spread the word and let other people know. You can find us on Instagram at mistakescast, and you can also email us at Gmail, mistakescast@gmail.com.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next time.